In this video, we are going to discuss one of the most controversial topics around the world, the death penalty. The death penalty can only be imposed on defendants convicted of capital offenses such as murder, treason, genocide, or the killing or kidnapping of a congressman, the president, or a Supreme Court justice. Unlike other punishments, a jury must decide whether to impose the death penalty.
Executions in Taiwan are typically carried out by shooting. Prisoners are sedated, laid face down, and shot to the heart. Currently, there are at least 37 people on the death row. The last execution was carried out in 2020. Major arguments against the death penalty focus on its inhumaneness, lack of deterrent effect, continuing racial and economic biases, and irreversibility. Proponents argue that it represents just retribution for certain crimes, deter crime, protect society, and preserve the moral orders. Or in short, we can say they simply deserve to die. Keeping murderers alive cheapens human life because it belittles murder. Imagine that the punishment for murder was the same as for driving over the speed limit. Wouldn't that belittle murder and therefore cheapen human life? Of course it would, right? And of course, putting the murderers to death doesn't bring back the victim's life, but it sure does provide some sense of justice. What about the innocent that may be executed? Another reason is that by keeping murderers alive, many more people can be murdered, other prisoners, guards, and people outside in case of escape or after release, than the small number of people who might be wrongly executed. And moreover, with DNA testing and other advanced forensic tools, it is virtually impossible to execute innocent people. The tolerance for error is extremely small, but it isn't zero. They do make sacrifices of the remote possibility of the innocence in order to accomplish in the vast majority of the cases. The apparent racial disparity in the death penalty is real insofar 11 to 12% of the population seems to occupy 40 or 45% of death row. While real, it is much more subtle than racism itself could be radically reduced by redefining what crimes constitute the worst of the worst, and a number of other changes could be made which would radically reduce the apparent disparity without eliminating the death penalty itself.
Executions, they argue, are cruel and immoral. Human life is valuable and everybody has a right to live. No one has the right to take away a human life, not even organized states. Human rights activists argue that death penalty is a form of revenge against offenders, and revenge is not necessarily about social justice. Another important argument supported by abolitionists is that the death penalty discriminates against minorities and the poor, as it is people from these groups that are more likely to be sentenced to death. For example, although African Americans make up only about 13% of the U.S. population, almost 50% of convicts on the death row are African American. There is also always the possibility of a wrongful verdict that might irrevocably send innocent people to the death row. Finally, opponents of capital punishment argue that empirical reality disproves some of the arguments of defenders of the death penalty. There is no proof that the death penalty or long prison sentence have a strong deterrent effect. Crime rates are no lower in countries with death penalty. Furthermore, the cost of carrying out a death sentence can be much more expensive than keeping a criminal in jail, due to legal costs, number of appeals, but also security and incarceration costs.